Hey everyone, Andrew here, bringing you another video review, and today we're going to be doing Justice League of America Sanctuary. Take a look at this comic cover right here. Now, Justice League of America Sanctuary is an interesting Justice League story because, well, there's really no story there. It's a bunch of small stories or themes that tie together with each other, or if not with each other, more or less with future stories and other stories outside the Justice League. You see some tie-ins with some future Justice League stories, some tie-ins with Final Crisis, and some tie-ins with some other stuff. But we'll get into that later. Let's actually try to give you a sense of what these stories are. I guess the biggest story, or the main story, would be the Sanctuary story, in that Dr. Waller, or Amanda Waller, whatever you want to call her, is sending her Suicide Squad out to capture all these villains to send them to Prison Planet. A group of villains led by the Key, which is a Justice League villain, and a very loved one, might I add, has decided to go to the Justice League and beg for sanctuary, protection from Waller. Waller doesn't necessarily like this, and she takes matters into her own hands. So it's kind of like Justice League of America versus the Suicide Squad. In addition to that, another story that ties into this is that they actually find the Prison Planet and go there to search for these missing villains. However, things don't quite go the way they want, and instead they encounter an old Justice League villain, Kinjaro. There's other subtle stories in there. Probably the biggest subtle story would have to deal with Vixen, because Vixen's powers have been kind of loopy lately. She hasn't necessarily been calling on the powers of her animals, but rather been calling on the powers of other superheroes and her allies. We find out in this book that it's not just powers, but skills and abilities. For example, she's able to mimic the power of the Green Lantern. Really? She's able to use Red Arrow's accuracy. Really? So stuff among that is basically what's happening with Vixen. And some of the more fun stuff, because Vixen's story, although very subtle with the Justice League stuff, has really turned out to be an interesting story. And it kind of comes full circle in the next Justice League title, which would be Second Coming, which I will be reviewing after this. But that's a different review for a different day. So, Sanctuary. Let's just get into the good, the bad, and whether or not you should get it. Well, good. For the most part, the art is nice. And, Ed Benz is one of my favorite artists, but they have a few other artists jump in here, too. So the art is pretty good. I also like at one point where Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman sit down and they just have a conversation, talking about stuff. It's not necessarily about a mission. It's not about this or that. It's just stuff, just chilling. And I thought that was kind of cool because seeing the Trinity interact with each other is very fun because they're friends, but they're so different, and how they interact is always intriguing. It's like watching a lion hunt down a gazelle. It's just, you gotta watch it and see how it happens because it's just so cool. So that's also a nice point too. The concept of the story isn't bad. I like the concept of these villains going for the Justice League for help in the Suicide Squad versus the Justice League. I thought that was a pretty good idea, although it was kind of short, but I'll go into that in a bit. And I like the developments that's been happening with Vixen lately, which is also nice. Vixen has turned out to... See, before this, I've only read a few things with Vixen. However, since reading her joining the Justice League, she has become one of a very appealing character, a character I really like. So I really like the stuff that's happening with her in this. Downsides, though, and there are some downsides. There's no fucking story. There's just a bunch of small little stories that connect together, nothing really big. So it feels as though there's really no point to this. It does tie into Final Crisis, which I guess is a good thing, but it's not necessary for the reader to read for it to tie into Final Crisis. So that's kind of a bad thing. They try to make a tie-in, but it didn't quite work that well. There's just not enough good with this book to make it worth picking up, which makes me come into whether or not you should get it. No, you should not get this. This is more of a buffer than anything. It kind of lays down the foundation for future Justice League stuff, but it's not necessary. Really, only good stuff that is necessary in here is the Vixen stuff, and even then is debatable at best. So if you're picking up Justice League stuff, you probably would want to skip Sanctuary. I mean, even if you're reading Final Crisis and you want to read Justice League stuff, you can read this and it ties a little bit into Final Crisis. But I mean, really, this is something to avoid. If you do for some reason want to pick it up in trade. The trade is out. You'll get it for cheaper. The trade is, I think, $17, where this is $19. It's not much of a difference, but, you know, might as well. So, Sanctuary, definitely not a good Justice League story. This is Andrew saying peace out for now.